Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me on the Influencing on Camera, the podcast. I'm here with my good friend, Alison Repp.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So, Alison, I know a lot of people have confusion on authenticity and imposter syndrome, but before we get into all of that, tell everybody as to why you are the perfect choice for talking about these things.
Well, there's a lot of people out there talking about this stuff, and there's tons of people who are great at it, and some people who are saying it from just personal experience. I am actually trained. I have a graduate degree in this. I'm a licensed therapist, and I have had many more in-depth trainings even after getting my degree, my master's. On this particular subject, which is rooted in an approach, a therapeutic approach that is grounded in Eastern philosophy and backed by Western science. And so it's just a really cool approach to take. And I love it because it is very counterintuitive, and it is not mainstream at all, but it is extremely powerful. So I'm really passionate about talking about this stuff.
We're bringing in Alison today because she is like the person that really brought me to roots with authenticity and really why it matters. And it has really changed the way that I look at things, especially with this crazy year that we just had and what's happening now. So, Alison, give us a crash course, if you don't mind, on what authenticity means like as a word.
Yeah. It's funny because I like that you're asking that question because people have all different kinds of definitions for all the words, it just really matters what it means to you. So to me, authenticity is alignment with the best version of yourself. It is behaving in ways that feel the very best to you.
A lot of people are afraid to be their authentic selves because they're like, oh my gosh, what if people don't like me? Where does this idea where we feel like we have to be liked, like, come from, in your opinion?
Yeah. So, it actually stems back to when we were early Homo sapiens. When we were early Homo sapiens, it was all about survival, right? And so we were constantly trying to figure out ways to not be killed. Everything was literally a matter of life or death.
Right.
And so one of the ways to stay alive was to be in a group, in a tribe. And then you had numbers and you had more power. And so if you weren't part of a group, you were out on your own and you would literally die. And so we've evolved a lot since then, but that core instinct is still there to fit in and to be liked by people. And as we've evolved, we've started to do it in these really kind of convoluted ways, to be part of groups. And we've gotten kind of strange ideas about what we have to do to be liked by people.
Right.
And then if you bring it into our upbringing, we're born completely aligned with ourselves, and as we're little children, we're completely aligned with ourselves. um, and then as we get older, we're influenced by our parents, our teachers, media, social media, all these things around us
Yeah.
for who it is best for us to be. And I could get into where all of that came from, but I won't because because people might have opinions about some of that. But it basically comes down to, we're kind of programmed in certain ways from top down
Mhm.
to so that we're easier to control. Um, but on an individual level, we're influenced by all these things outside of ourselves, and we're given positive reinforcement for the things that people around us like, and then we're
Right.
given punishment for the things that people don't like. And so we start to learn, like, oh well, I need to do this kind of thing or this kind of thing, and in order to fit in. And then we end up so far away from ourselves, um, And we're in this place where we're just constantly trying to analyze, like, okay, now what does this person want from me, and what does this person want me to be,
Yeah.
and
We want to
we
please
try to fill
everybody.
all these different roles. And what that does is it causes us a lot of stress. It causes our confidence levels to plummet, um, and it makes us really unfulfilled in the long run. And so people
Yeah.
wonder why they're so unhappy, and that is a huge part of it that we don't really think about a lot. It's because, you know, if you were in a stage play just performing all the time, you get exhausted. And that's kind of what we're doing in our lives, is
Mhm.
just putting on a performance all the time when we're not willing to recognize and honor who it feels best for us to be.
That sounds like that feeds a lot into this concept of imposter syndrome, and it's getting a lot more attention now because more people
Mhm.
that we either regard as being really awesome or as people to look up to talk about that they have this. For people that are not familiar with it, can you just give us kind of a basic definition of what imposter syndrome is?
Yeah, imposter syndrome is being in a position, whether it's work or parenting or in a relationship, but typically now it's applying to work. That's where it's mostly used, where you're in a position that you don't feel worthy of being in.
So, with people not aligning with their authentic selves, with what you were talking about earlier, then they're pretending to be somebody. And then imposter syndrome makes sense because they aren't who they actually are. So, with people that are kind of going through this with their businesses, especially because a lot of us are having to find new ways to survive, right?
Yep.
Because our world has been turned upside down, that they don't feel worthy because they, let's say they did, therapy for 15 years and now they can't do that anymore. They have to come into something new. They're like, oh, well, I'm not qualified.
Yeah.
And how would you help somebody kind of understand that their worth, comes from inside, and that if they're their authentic selves along with this fear of, the imposter syndrome, how they can really connect with themselves?
Yeah. So, first of all, it again goes back to the thing that gets us into imposter syndrome mode, are those thoughts that stem from when we're early Homo sapiens, right? So it's those thoughts that we have of like, I'm not good enough. I mean, that's basically all of the work I've done with clients. It just boils down to that is,
Mm,
all of the negative thoughts that they have boil
yeah.
down usually to I'm not good enough in some form or another. It can look like I'm going to fail, nobody likes me, I'm not worthy, but that all just it boils down to I'm not good enough. And so um really understanding first of all that's where those thoughts come in, and we tend to just internalize our thoughts and not view them objectively. Either that or we fight with them, and we try to say no, 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 I'm good enough, I'm good enough. um and so, yeah, the imposter syndrome, I think that even more so than it's stemming from being misaligned with your authentic self, it causes us to be even more misaligned with our authentic selves. And that's where the stress and the unhappiness and the misery comes in with imposter syndrome, and why it's becoming such a big issue, just, in our society, is because we're getting more and more into that space of like, oh, I'm supposed to be this. And syndrome is especially prevalent with women,
Okay.
and especially in the workplace. We have a male driven society, and so it's just, and then males compete with each other also to be like the alpha. So
Okay. Yeah.
and so I would say that more so than it's stemming from misalignment, it increases the misalignment.
As business owners, then how do we deal with imposter syndrome? How do we find our self-worth when we've learned or we believe it's incorrect?
Yeah. So um it's an interesting thing to I view this in a very different way than most people do. Most of us are searching for confidence, or we're
Okay. Yeah.
looking for a way to find our self-worth. And It's actually our natural state, right? If you think about what I was saying with like, you are born here and then all these things happen and you're over here. Well, our natural state is that self-worth and that confidence. We're not born into this world feeling like I'm not good enough, right?
Right.
We either we internalize that message either because it's told directly to us or because people are always just telling us to be different. And so then we get that message that we're not good enough because somebody's always telling us to be something else, right?
Something else, yeah.
So it's our natural state. And all it takes to get back to that natural state, or the first step to get back to that natural state, is to start observing your thoughts that you have that induce that feeling of imposter syndrome, and that um, and that thought of like, I'm not good enough, and notice it, but don't put any energy into it, right? Like, acknowledge it, but don't try to fight it, don't try to run away from it, don't try to convince yourself of the opposite, like, no, 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 I am good enough. Just notice it. And my favorite thing to do, my favorite little technique, is to just say, okay, thanks, mind, and not put a lot of weight into it. And so as you start to, and this is a process, by the way, like this,
This
don't
is
you
not
don't
a
just do
one
it once,
thing. Yeah.
right? Like, fully expect these thoughts to come back over and over again. The point is not to get rid of the thoughts. The point is to turn the volume down on them so that they're not blaring in your face all the time, getting in your way of being the best version of yourself. And to observe these thoughts with curiosity instead of judgment. I say that with everything. Observe everything in your life with curiosity instead of judgment, because judgment only elicits more unhelpful, negative thoughts that aren't going to do you any good in the long run. So that's the first thing I would say, is just start noticing those thoughts. Over time, the
Mhm.
volume will turn down. But it really does take consistency with that. And as that volume turns down on them, your confidence and your self-worth, and your authenticity start being turned up just naturally. You don't have to do anything to
Right.
make yourself be confident. Um, and then the second thing that I think makes just a giant difference is understand. Are we allowed to cuss?
So, FYI, before we get into part two, there might be some explicit content. So, if you want, go ahead and skip for a little bit and come join us in a bit.
I'm just gonna say one word. Know who the fuck you are. Right?
Right.
And that's so much easier said than done. I mean, how often do you hear people say like, you do you, or just be
Hmm.
you? And that just,
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, but most of us have been so programmed into being something else that pleases
Yeah.
somebody else that we don't know even the first step to discovering who I actually am, right? So I have this exercise, but it really changed my life. And it's called the authenticity card sort. And with this card sort, there's a stack of 100 values, core values. And you go through it and you narrow it down to your top 7 to 10 that feel the very best to you when you are aligned with that. So it's things like being respectful or loving or humorous or genuine or reliable, things like that. And when you narrow those down, it gives you this really clear picture of who it feels amazing for you to be. And and that's what authenticity is, right? It is
Yeah.
aligning with the way of being that feels really good to you. And I always like to add, in the long run, right? It's always things that,
Right.
like, you want to look back and be proud of it, because sometimes we get caught up in like the chemical release in our body from like screaming profanities at the car next to you, right? And we're like, oh, that felt good to like get in that guy's face. And but then in the long run, you're like, actually, like, that's not really who I want to be, right? And
Right.
um And so, yeah, it just, that's a big part of it too, is who does it feel best for you to be in the long run? Aside from that exercise, you can just start thinking about the times in your life that you just felt so energized and amped up, and you were like, God, I wish I could be that way all the time. And start to pick that apart and notice, like, what was I doing? Um, I have a memory, you know this, because I've said this in
Okay.
my course,
Yes,
of
yes, I've done the
of
course.
yeah, of when I got off of a school bus. I don't know how old I was, maybe like 11, I'm not sure. And I got off a school bus and I dropped my pencil case. And I, for the first time in my life, went, oh, shit. You're gonna have to cut that out. And oh my gosh, when that happened, I felt so elated. It felt like this like cage opened up in my chest and all these white doves flew out, and I was like, the sun shone down on me and I was like, oh, like with a halo over my head. And it wasn't as much the cussing, it was that I had refrained from cussing because everybody told me it was bad, right? And everybody outside of me told me that it made me unintelligent, or it made me a sinner, or it made me whatever it was. And so it was like all this oppression, and
Right.
and so doing that was like, oh, I'm free from all of these things outside of myself, these ideas and these messages holding me down. And so, of course, I hid it from people after that, and I would just kind of cuss to myself sometimes, but I can still feel that feeling of freedom in my chest. Another example is a few years ago, my husband and I were in Vegas, and I was in a hotel room, and he had to do some work. And I was like, what should I do? And I started blasting music, and I jumped around on the bed, and I was singing and dancing, like, throwing my legs up in the air, and just like having fun. And so, what that identifies for me is being playful, right? That's a core value. um Being in the present moment, that's a core value. Laughing and being humorous,
Right.
that's a core value. um and then the one note I also want to say on that is that make sure that it is something that you are doing, right? A lot of times in our society, we equate values with morals, or we
Mm-hmm.
equate values with shoulds, or we equate values with, like, right or wrong, good or bad, whatever. And it really comes down to, this is at least the way that I define values, is they are something that feels good to you, right? It doesn't matter. Most people in my life would tell me that cussing is bad and wrong, and not lately though.
Yeah.
Lately, people are really appreciating it, but that shift happened after I owned it, right?
Right.
But they it's very easy, as you're even at, like, when you do the card sort, I worded it in a way to try to be empowering to people, instead of making it a way that's more of the shoulds, right? Or more
Right.
of expecting things from other people. So a lot of times people will say, oh, I value trust, right?
Right.
I need to have people in my life who are trustworthy. And viewing it that way is giving all of your personal power away. And that is expecting somebody else to be something. And that is not a core value. Right.
Right.
So when it's a core value, you would twist that and say, no, it feels good to me to be trustworthy. Right.
Right.
So I always say, like, think about what you are doing. You can always be in alignment with your core values. So if you ever find yourself saying, well, I need this and this and this outside of myself to change before I can feel aligned with myself, that's not a core value. That's a goal.
Right.
And you can absolutely
Goals are
work
good.
toward goals.
Right.
Right. But you have no real power over other people and how they are behaving.
Mm-hmm.
And so you want to face it inward, right? Like, how am I being in this situation?
And so when we talk about applying authenticity and your authentic message into your business, I know that a lot of people have struggled with this. I was one of them, where I thought that like videographers had to be a certain way. We had to dress a certain way. We had to do things a certain way. We had to act a certain way. And I was competing and in a very like specific male dominated field of people that were a certain category. They all kind of looked and acted the same way. And there's no way that I could be that. So when I finally realized, like, oh, I'm not like this person, I don't need to be like this person because people want me because of whatever it is that I am. I started getting better clients. I started getting more fulfillment out of my work, and I got jobs that I really wanted to do, and I had to fire way fewer clients. So
and that involved you dancing on a stage as a squirrel.
yeah.
Because like, I want her.
And it did. It took me dressing up in a squirrel suit, jumping around on stage and being myself. And I think that it was really hard for me because I am a very quirky person. A lot of people would call me a nerd, which is fine. I own that. That is me. And I was okay with kind of showing the sides of me, but it took a lot because I was an introvert as well. So I did not want to show more of myself than I had to. And you want me to show the vulnerable parts? I mean, no, I don't want to. So as far as people like that, how can you explain to them that their authentic self in their business will make them overall more fulfilled and happier in their job?
First of all, trying to act a certain way or, be like somebody else who's doing, who's in your field and doing kind of the same thing, you don't stand out, right? And when people can sense whether you are authentic or not. And there have been so many people over the years that sometimes it takes a little bit of time, but I have been like, ugh, I don't want to be a part of this. I don't want to follow you anymore. I don't want to be in any of your courses. I don't want to do any of this, because it becomes so obvious that they are putting on a show to try to please you or to try to be, this like authority or to and there's nothing wrong with like being an authority in your field, but like when you're doing it as a show, people can sense that. Or if they're just trying to sell you something that that wouldn't actually work for you, people can sense that. So they don't, I'm sure everybody listening has had those people in their life where they're so disconnected with themselves that it repels people, right?
Yeah.
And you want to be one of those people. Also, when we are acting in a certain way, we're not, that's disconnected from who we really are. We're going, like you said, we're going to attract clients who maybe align with that person we're pretending to be, but we don't actually like those people. We don't actually like that person. It doesn't feel good to us. So why would it feel good to you to be working with somebody like that? And I'm not saying that you only have clients who are exactly like you, but they vibe with you, right?
Yeah. It's gotta be close.
Yeah. The energy that you're putting out will draw people in that match that energy. So if you are putting out a bunch of energy of just feeling unworthy, or you're completely out of alignment, you're not happy with yourself, you're not
A common one right now is
fulfilled.
panic and desperation. You're seeing that a lot, and you're getting not great choices in clients. So
And
how do you correct that?
So then they come to you, and they just match all of the things that you're throwing out there, and then you just have a bunch more of inauthentic energy.
Right.
And so, when you do these things that I've mentioned in this podcast, and just understanding who it feels best to be, and honoring that, it completely changes your vibe. People want realness. They want flaws. They want to see failure. They want to see you without makeup or you falling off a chair
Yeah.
or, like they want to see those things because they want to feel like they belong, right? Back to the early
Mhm.
Homo sapien thing. They want to feel like they belong with you. And there is not a human on this earth without their flaws or without um, their problems in life. And so you need to be authentic in showing all of those parts of you, good and bad. And it doesn't mean like, oh, make a podcast about all of the details of the fight you had with your husband last night,
Right.
right? But it's more
Sprinkle it
like,
in.
but yeah, it's
Sprinkle it
like,
in.
hey, I have fights with my husband. If you go and look on social media, it'll all look perfect. And
Right.
people don't want that. The most response I get to things is when I share times when I've had trouble as a parent or
Mhm.
times when I've, showed like what my skin actually looks like under the makeup and said like, God, I'm struggling with this cystic acne in my mid
Yeah.
30s, and
Yeah.
um
Which
and
sucks, by the
people,
way. I'm with
yeah,
you. That sucks.
yeah, and people love you for that. They love to engage with you when you do that, and they don't view you as somebody that they wouldn't trust or
Mhm.
somebody who they wouldn't be interested in your business. Um I can tell you that the people I have, read their books or heard them on social media who talk about who they really are and just really align with themselves and talk about their troubles, I respect them more. And I'm like, oh,
Mhm.
you have had the human experience that
Yeah.
I do. You're not some like
You're not
alien or
perfect.
celestial being.
Yeah.
You're human like me, and you have some different tools or some different talents than I do. And we can connect and I can trust you. We
Yeah.
don't trust people who we know are behaving in a way that's not truly them.
Right. And I think that that's the way you brought that up with social media is great because some of the posts that get the most attention are with me, like when I dressed up as a Ninja Turtle and I jumped around with our HR department. And it's just this tiny dog just playing with me, had no idea that it was happening when I was doing the dance
Yeah.
at first. And that one got a lot of attention. Another one was where one of my other videographers was pushing herself around on her butt in a yoga
Yeah.
studio singing row 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 your boat, and she went all the way around me, and I just happened to be recording because I was doing some diagnostics, and that was another thing that was totally put out there, and people saw us as relatable and fun because
Yep.
I mean, this videography is really stressful. Even like somebody like yourself who's really good at it and really like good in front of the camera, it's still super stressful. And
Yeah.
so to know that we were going to like damp it down a little bit on the stress was nice for that. So
Yeah. One
there's
of
a lot.
the video that you mentioned earlier, of me and my husband dancing
Yes,
in
yes,
our elf costumes
yes.
on
Great
Instagram,
video.
that got more attention than anything I've ever posted, right?
Mhm.
In 30 minutes, I had 3,500 views.
Yeah,
And that was just us being like silly. That was one take. We did not rehearse it. I was like,
yeah.
Jackson, come dance with me real quick to this song. And we just did it. And then, and that was just being in this like flow state, aligned with ourselves and who we really are. And, um, you know, when we see people who we think are perfect, we don't want to engage with them
Right.
because or we do, but when we engage with them, usually we're like that in that desperation mode, like, how do I be
Right.
like you? Which is even more
Love me.
disconnect from being like that. But
Yeah.
also when you are presenting as perfect and completely
Hmm.
polished all the time, it stresses people out. It
Yeah.
stresses your audience out, and they feel overwhelmed, and they don't even want to start with whatever you have to offer because they think, well, they're up here and I'm down here, and it's going to
Hmm.
take so much time and energy and effort to get up to here,
And then
right?
when
And so
something comes out that's like controversial, it's like such a big deal because there's so and so perfect that did this. It's even harder for us to like recognize. I don't know. I'm with you on that
yeah,
though.
yeah.
100%.
Yeah, and you
So
don't want to have to be inducing stress in
yeah.
your target audience.
No, no, they don't want to work with you, just have more stress. So
Right.
there's a few things that I want to make sure that we chat about before you go and do the other amazing thing that you do with your life, with
The
your whole,
momming.
yeah, all of that. I'm impressed. I'm just going to say that much. So, as far as what you have going on here, we talked about a couple of ways that people can learn their more authentic selves and how to implement that in their business and just overall to increase their quality of life. But they're not going to learn that in like this quick podcast, right? It's going to take,
Yeah.
time and effort. So, you have a couple of offers. You have the Ascension Collective. And what is
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, so the Ascension Collective just launched with my co-host Jen Stack. And so the Ascension Collective is for women, well, I should say people who identify as women. And we are coming together twice a month for 2 group calls. And these calls involve I'm the practical one, right? And so I have these practical, like how-to tools for some of the things we talked about today, for just improving your life and thriving. We address thoughts and emotions and mindfulness and being authentic, and then we address manifesting and creating the life of your dreams. And it's all very unconventional stuff. It is definitely not mainstream tools,
Great.
but it's very powerful tools. For people who want to be included on those calls, it's $37 a month, which is nothing for what we're doing on these calls.
Of
It's
course.
such a good
Totally.
value, but I
Yeah.
want it to be accessible for everyone. So if people use the code influence37, they will get their first month free. That code will also apply to if they want to buy it as a yearly subscription. It'll take $37 off of that. So you'll end up saving over $100 total for the year.
That's
Um,
exciting. And then you
yeah.
had this other thing that we were talking about before we started the meeting, and that was the card sort that you were talking about in the podcast
Yep.
itself, and that people can access that. So, how do they go about that?
Yeah. So that I will say is also part of the boot camp that I have that you filmed. That was
Yes,
incredible.
that was a fun
Um,
boot camp. I learned so much.
yeah, so that boot camp again is all the things I talk about with mindset and manifesting. And so that's one of the sections, but I wanted to take that exercise from that section out because it's just really fun and really valuable in and of itself. So you can either get that in the boot camp, or you can get it for $5.
Yeah,
It's
that's
usually
exciting.
17, but for your listeners, we'll do it for 5 with the
Thank
code
you.
authentic5. And these codes will be good for 2 years.
So, and that's great that that's 2 years. So basically get on that in the next couple of years. But I think that it will help some people, I really think, identify their authentic selves. Some people think they know it or have no idea. And I think that that spectrum is pretty wide. So this will
Yeah.
appeal to people. And then once they figure out who that is, they can start practicing what we're talking about here. So
Yeah. Yeah. And it's just, even if you're not looking to completely transform your life, which I think that it has the power to do that. I've experienced it. It's fun. It's really fun. It's just
yeah.
a cool thing. I mean, all my friends always want to do it with me. My clients love it. I should say old clients love it because I don't really have clients anymore on purpose, but I don't want to confuse people because people are always asking, if I can be their therapist or they can do coaching with me. And I'm like, sorry, I'm doing these other things now, but
But no, this is really exciting. So again, I wanted to thank you so much, Allison, for joining me today and really
thank
helping
you for having
people
me.
like really cognitively understand authenticity and imposter syndrome beyond what we just are reading in media, and from somebody that actually, helps people with it, or
Yeah.
back in the day helps people with it, and who really understands it on a higher education level. So thank you again for being here.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. I loved the questions and I'm really excited to keep hearing the episodes that you put out because I feel like you were meant to do this.
Oh, thank you. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us on Influencing on Camera, the podcast.